I'm dialing in from Nashville. It's great to see some people. It's great to get introduced to the Denver market a little more and people beyond. So what I was hoping to do today was to share a little bit about myself, my journey in the data visualization space, and what we've been doing, and talk a little bit about how that has culminated in a product, a data visualization product. I wanted to give you a little peek at that, and then really just open it up to your questions. As I started to prepare for this, and Paul was saying maybe we could start with 15 minutes or so of kind of background and stuff. I sort of set myself the challenge of saying, well, I'll just summarize everything I've learned in the last 15 years, see if I could just boil that down. And it became, in my mind, a little bit of a big effort. But what I wanted to do was kind of see if I could synthesize some of the lessons, some of the things that we've gone through as a company and in our thinking around data visualization, data storytelling. So this is our little group that when we started the company 15 years ago. I was a little brighter-eyed and bushy-headed at the time that I am now. But we were just starting a company. We wanted to do something in data. The guy on the right there is my brother and co-founder. Chris and I really just found that early on, what we got passionate about was the challenge of communicating data. So we did some projects and consulting around analyzing and exploring data, but really we got energized when it came to how do you visualize that and present it in impactful ways. And that sort of became our theme and passion and vision for the company as we grew. And for the first 8 or so years of the company, we were really doing services work. We were a consulting company, and we were working with lots of different clients and industries, probably like a bunch of people on this call, learning about the best ways that we thought to be able to present and communicate data. And that over some time period led to, we did a lot of blogging. So someone mentioned reading our blog. We've been blogging from the beginning when blogging started to become cool to beyond when blogging was no longer cool, is sort of the way I feel about it. Still blogging, even though there's lots of other ways of communicating things. I think we just have always wanted to put our thinking out there. So I definitely encourage you to go look at the blog and search some things out there. We ended up writing this book called Data Fluency, which was trying to really synthesize all our thinking about how organizations can better use the data they have and communicate it internally to be more data driven. So we released that book a few years ago. And then really the journey we've been on has been about ultimately getting to this place where we wanted to take all that thinking and the way we've thought about data storytelling and turn that into a solution, a product that would allow anybody to take all those lessons and apply it in their own work. And that's what, when I talk about Juicebox, that's what Juicebox is. It's a SaaS platform that really has taken, in some ways, 15 years for us to think about what are the best ways to be able to communicate data and turn that into a solution that anybody can use. So I'll get to that, but that's sort of been the journey. And what I wanted to do was see if I could just kind of summarize some of the key lessons that we've been through that we feel like we wanted to bake into a product, and are the things that we're always talking about that are important in this challenge. And the challenge to us is really, how do you take all of the hard work, the analysis, the data cleaning, the prepping the data, understanding the insights in the data, and how do you bridge that gap into the minds of the people who can make decisions and act on that data? And this is something that we've called, we coined this term, it's like over a decade ago, the last mile of analytics, I think we called it business intelligence at the time. But that's the challenge that we are focused on, is is being able to bridge that gap and get those people to do something about all the hard work that you've done in the data. And I want to talk about kind of the three things that I feel like have been missing and that we've seen that we feel like need to exist in order to bridge this last mile. So what are those gaps in the last mile? To me, those are, and I will talk about these in a little more depth, putting your audience first, thinking about the people who are actually going to use that data, and kind of having a humanist view of data in addition to the analysis that you do. Data storytelling as a skill set and set of tools to help you engage those people so that they find the data that you're presenting easier to understand and engage with and want to work with that data. And then the last thing is that we have found that the ability for anyone who has data and has a message that they want to convey, who wants to bridge that gap, I think it's been complex and technical for people to be able to easily tell those stories and communicate that data in a more people-friendly way. So the ability to make that really easy for people to create ways of presenting data is kind of the third piece. So let me move this. There we go. Sorry. So RJ Andrews wrote this book, and I thought this quote was an interesting part of what I view as the transition from exploratory analysis. You see it says expands your personal knowledge. So he's saying, as you explore the data, you start to understand what is in the data, what is important in the data. But then as you learn that, it's important to shift from that view of you're engaging with the data and exploring it to focus on the audience and what you want to tell the people from the data. And that's kind of the essence, I think, of what I think of when we're talking about people first, is sort of a catchphrase at Juice. We want to make things people first. It starts with, I think, empathizing with your audience. So all the work we've done, I think this has been essential for us, is to say, put yourself in the shoes of that person who could benefit from this data. What tools do they have? What decisions can they make? What are their pain points? And then how can the data help them be a hero in their job? So, trying to think about how you're going to empower somebody else with the data. And then, of course, we all talk about this a lot. I think in this community, it's about leading people to action, driving actions. A lot of times when we're working with clients and thinking about how we tell data stories, we try to narrow the focus to what could that person that you're trying to inform, what can they do in their job? What levers do they have that they can pull? Because it's not really helpful to go tell somebody something that they can't do anything about. So guiding them to things that they can actually take action on, I think is people first. Making that data, when it's presented, friendly, intuitive. This is, stuff that the kind of the core lessons. I think data visualization has evolved a lot and gotten a lot better over the last decade in the ability for people to understand what is friendly and intuitive data presentation. And then the last piece is that I think it's important to view the presentation or that sharing of data, that bridge, less as a telling exercise and more as engaging your audience in a dialogue and starting a conversation, because it's pretty rare that people just get some information and immediately take some action on it. Usually what they do is they get that information, it raises another question, and you want to have an informed conversation that will eventually lead to action, but it takes some dialogue, and enabling that, I think, is really important. So that's kind of the people first mindset that we try to bring. Data storytelling, it's the name of the group, so I probably don't need to convince this group, but our perspective on data storytelling is that there are a whole set of essential elements of traditional storytelling that we want to bring into how we communicate data. One of those is the structure of data, of stories. You know, stories traditionally have a beginning that sets up the problem. They have the sometimes called the messy middle of all the exploration of that problem, which ultimately leads to some resolution. So that's a structure, of course, in stories that we're all super familiar with. It's sort of embedded in our thinking. And we feel like in data storytelling, you want to build on those expectations and patterns that already exist. So for us, I could go on and on about this element, but you want to set the context. What is the problem you're trying to solve? I think if you see a lot of traditional dashboards don't do a good job of saying what is this thing about, and what are we trying to understand here, setting that context, maintaining the context as you move through it, using this structure to walk people through what's the problem, and then helping people resolve that problem by stepping them through the stages of exploring the data. And then I said go beyond data visualization. I think that one of the things that we really believe in is that you really need to, data stories are not just data visualization. Wrapping that in the narrative of the data, in other context and media, images, video, there's a whole bunch of elements that can be brought together where data might be driving the analytical part of your story, but there can be a whole set of other things that are important parts to give context and engage people with the story. So bringing other things into the data visualization, we feel like is really important. And then the last thing I'll just touch on is this sense of how do you making it really easy for people to be able to be creators. I think this is, I saw this comment here. Do all data analysts have to be graphic designers now? I saw that on Reddit the other day, and this person was like pleading with like, I just want to analyze the data. Why do I have to make pretty charts? Why is that part of my job description now? And I mean, it's an interesting discussion, but I think this is what we're trying to help people solve, is say that not everyone is a graphic designer. Not everyone is great at making all the pretty charts or wants to spend the time on that. What they really want to do, what they should want to do, is find the insights and then communicate those effectively. And there's a whole set in a lot of different areas of creation. There have been a lot of progress, I think, in terms of the tools that allow people with information or content to be able to create really high quality output and then deliver that. So the example I use a lot is Canva. If you guys are familiar with Canva as a designer tool, I view that as like, it's about not requiring people to be experts in Illustrator or Photoshop or something, but still be able to create something that's good. It might not be great. It might not be they might not have as much control as some other tools, but kind of opening the door for more people to be creators, effective creators. So tools that do that, think about, it's about making things lightweight, so it's easy to create something. It's often about having less choices and making it hard to make bad choices. I mean, we all know in like Excel, it's very easy to make a bad choice. You make a pivot table, it's very easy to just screw the whole thing up. Trying to avoid that, make it kind of simple for beginners, and making things beautiful and engaging without having to be a designer. And of course, I think the thing that a lot of these tools do effectively is they say, there are a lot of patterns. There are patterns that we've seen around data storytelling, structures around data storytelling that are common, and give people great starting points when they're building something so they don't have to invent something, kind of create it from whole cloth. That kind of starting from a blank screen is incredibly hard for people. So those are kind of the things that we have absorbed through working with many dozens of clients and building lots of analytical tools. And they're the things that we have baked into Juicebox. I want to give you just a really quick tour of Juicebox. It sort of all happens in the browser. It's a hosted solution, so you can create a free account. And it's an environment where you can build interactive data stories. That's how we think about it. We're trying to make it a lightweight, easy way where anybody can go in, put their data in, and create an interactive way that abides by all those principles that I was talking about. So I'll give you just a little sense of how it works. When we build something in here, it's basically, think of it like a website building tool. So the stuff on the right here is something I built. I recently put together a little, like, here's what a bar chart is. Very simple, straightforward kind of thing. Why do you use bar charts? And you're sort of building this stuff using this editor on the left. So everything that's on the page here is essentially edited and constructed with the content on the left. And we have this, when I talk about narrative flow, it's really about, we're very inspired by things like the New York Times and the way they do data journalism, and the ability to walk somebody through content and data and let them interact with and explore that data, but also give them explanations and context around that as they're walking through it. So the data stories in Juicebox can have images and text and descriptions, and it can also have the ability to select and interact with the data itself. So it's sort of a combination of like Tableau style visualization, but also the ability to create kind of an interactive website that you can share with people. All of these applications are going to look different and use different visual components, but essentially it's kind of a set of building blocks that we have in here that you stack up. So if you think of it like a bunch of working with Legos or something, where you're stacking up a bunch of Legos, each of the visual components in here links together, which is a really important part of what we think good data storytelling should do. Is if I select the time range here, that should drive the results in the next stage, in the next step of my story. If I select a metric here, that should drive the content of this bar chart. So we want to have this kind of linked story that you walk through, allowing your users to drill down into that data and find the insights that are useful. So it doesn't get you around needing to know what your message is and know what story you want to tell and how you want to walk people through it. But what it does do is make it very easy to be able to create a great looking, interactive, exploratory experience, kind of an interactive infographic that should be intuitive for your users to be able to understand kind of what they're seeing and what comes next. So all those things are kind of built-in components in Juicebox. So I don't want to spend any more time selling Juicebox, but it is, I think, important just in terms of our journey. Like we've built a lot of dashboards, a lot of analytical tools, and our journey and my journey has a lot been about like what works in being able to communicate data, and then trying to turn that into something that other people can use to be able to benefit from all those lessons. So I'm going to stop right there. And see if we have some questions.
Awesome. And Zach, I just want to comment that it's just so interesting seeing Juicebox, kind of how I think about, how I've seen data visualization being used from like, oh, we need to figure out the right way to show something in a report, to let's create an interactive dashboard, to let's, essentially tell like a story in a web-based format. And that's where folks are consuming information. So that gives us the flexibility to put context and not just have like one dashboard, but actually put context around each piece as you're interacting with it. So I think it sort of nicely summarizes how a lot of this work has evolved. So folks with questions, feel free to take yourself off of mute. I think that's option one. If you're in a position where you got some nasty background noise, just type in the chat and I will field the question on your behalf. So I'll shut up and open it up to anybody else who has something they want to ask.
Am I still sharing my screen, or did I turn that off? Because
I still see it.
Yeah, I seem to not be able to turn it off. So I apologize.
I can turn it off for you. You want me to do that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Lost the button to be able to do that. Okay.
Gotcha. So what questions do folks have?
I have a question around, I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that goes behind communicating the data, and just thinking about, because I am in education, about making stuff accessible to all. So thinking about screen readers and how charts, whether they're useful or not for screen readers, thinking about things like color. I have a tendency, or had a tendency, to use color to try and stress things, and then thinking about people that are maybe colorblind or have a visual impairment. So trying to think ahead about addressing those, so that it's not a case of later down the road when you realize that there's somebody you've excluded from your presentation, thinking about how you can now include them. So just wondering if that's something, it looks like it's something that has gone through your mind as you've created this website, but just wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a hard problem, isn't it? Where it's like, how do you make data visualization accessible to people with, people who are blind? It's very, how does that work? I think that's a real challenge. I mean, the color thing, I think, is something that we've thought about, and I'm not sure we've totally baked it into the product, but I think one of the things we try to do is limit the amount the use of colors, so that you're really just you have kind of an emphasis color and then not emphasis. So I think in that way, and if you aren't in a place where you're trying to use a whole bunch of different colors and you've simplified it to an emphasis color, then I think that probably helps a lot in the colorblind scenario. But when you get into the actual visualization stuff, I don't know that we have a better answer than to say, I mean, often the answer on that is if someone can't see the visualizations, you need to make the data accessible. And the best way to do that is make it downloadable or put it into tables that are accessible through the product. I have a hard time with that. We have one developer who's very, very sensitive to that stuff, and we've gone through some audits on the accessibility of this, but I'd be curious if anyone has any great tips on that.
And I'd love for anybody else to jump in. I have to say, I feel like most of my work, my audience is like, I'm often speaking to an internal audience and an organization. So we know if there's an accessibility issue among a particular person. It's not, often creating something for the general public, where you have to sort of plan for folks who have needs that you can't really, essentially plan for folks who have a really wide variety of needs, because there's such a limited audience. So that's all I'll say.
So, Zach, this is Neil. I really appreciate your product and what you've shared so far today. This question is probably more kind of in the interpersonal domain. You mentioned about engaging with the customer and the client, and I found that to be one of the more challenging parts of what I do, because you want to tell a story. You feel like you understand the data, but then you get resistance to simplifying, and people want to drill down and get into the details, which you really feel are sort of tangential. So I was just wondering if you could speak to how you handle that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I just wrote a blog post on this topic because I basically said, well, the way we had thought about the last mile in this sense was like, if you build something great, it will be engaging. And I think what you're pointing out, Neil, is that's not necessarily true. There's layers of defenses that people have beyond this is attractive and easy to understand. They may have motivations that say, I don't want to believe this data because I have alternative pressures or reasons, or it challenges my assumptions. And the point that I guess that if I were to just summarize it, the key point that I would make is that creating a great data story or a great data product, as you might say, is sort of the beginning of the journey, and you really need to sell that. And this is something that analysts are not too excited about hearing that word sell. That's awkward. That's pushing your stuff, and then it should be good enough on its own. There's sort of this sense of like, I'm just being objective. But selling doesn't have to mean you're like convincing somebody in a way that's, hard selling or something. It can mean making sure people really understand what the product does. So getting out there and running tutorials and walking through what you've created. It's about helping people understand. I think the gap that a lot of people have, I see a lot is let's say I've created a dashboard and I release it to the organization. Well, the people who might use that don't necessarily understand why that's an important tool for them. You need to get to the basics of, this goes back to the people first point of how is this going to help that person be successful, and communicate to them that message first. This is for you. This is going to be useful. It's going to make you better at your job, and explain those things in a kind of messaging campaign, a communication effort. So it's sales and marketing have to be attached to helping people get engaged. And it is not, unfortunately for us and for all of us, it's not good enough to just create something great. You have to go that kind of extra mile, as it were. It's a great question, Neil.
That is a great question. And Zach, I had a different question around that, but another balancing act, because I do agree with Neil that, I guess I can relate to that challenge that sometimes, some staff like simplicity, other ones like more detail, and that seems to vary by staff. I also think another balancing act that I've struggled with is just trying to balance like point in time versus something that's, consistently helpful for people. So like a dashboard you can roll out, that's helpful, pretty much year over year. But a story to me is kind of like a point in time kind of thing. So I was curious how you balance that need of your audience.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction. So I would say that what we're helping people with Juicebox and a lot of the use cases I think about, we are thinking more like, I have some data, I've done some analysis, and I want to be able to easily summarize that for a presentation or a client deliverable, a little bit more like often one-off things. And because I think you alluded to this with dashboards, if someone's going to look at something every day, they don't need all the narration around it. They don't need all that context and explanation. at some point, like if they're using it every day, they just want the numbers. People are, and the efficiency of just seeing what is the important change. I mean, at some point a dashboard can turn into, well, what went up, what went down? Like you want to make that as simple as possible as well. But I think as you get to that repeated thing that people, if your audience is seeing something all the time, you do want to dial back the storytelling and the flow and all the things that you might put around it relative to the one-off where you're really trying to get on the same page with your audience about what you're sharing with them. I would say, and there's sort of a related concept, I would say, or dichotomy around exploration versus explanation. You guys probably talked about that in this group, but the sense that sometimes a data story is really about, you have a very clear message and you just want to explain that to somebody versus, I believe a data story could also have exploration elements. It could be more fluid than that, and it can have the ability to drill into that data and kind of find your stories. So sometimes we'll talk about storytelling versus story finding, and giving your audience an environment in which they can find interesting stories versus saying, here's the one message that I want you to take away from this. And that's, it's sort of a spectrum, and you got to decide for the situation kind of where you want to be in that exploration scale.
Interesting. Thank you, Zach.
Sure.
What other questions are out there? I bet somebody's got one.
No question too weird. There you go.
This is Jason. I'll throw one in there, kind of along the same vein of pushback. I'm just curious if anybody else's experience out there with this, but I have one or two clients that seem to be, let's call them old school, where they really are attached to their Excel, seeing data in rows and columns, right? And trying to get them to move forward with visualizations, right? And talking about how do you quickly see outliers and trends in a data table versus a visualization, right? Has anybody seen pushback to, I don't want to see the data visual, I want to see it in a grid, right? Because that's how I like it, that's how I work with it. So yeah, just curious if anybody's come across those type of people and recommendations on dealing with that.
So the related pushback is I don't want the interactive thing where I can explore the data. I want to print out. You probably get this from the same people. That
Yep,
type of thing.
I've heard that exact same thing. I just want to print it out and have it on my desk.
And have it. I mean, I guess it's another tough question, because you're like, if you're putting yourselves in the shoes of those people, and that is the way they're going to act on the data. If they're actually using the data and getting insights from data in that format, the question is the visualization, are you doing good by visualizing the data? I would guess that if they're looking at data in that way, there's a lot of things that are not being revealed in the data. So they're comfortable, but they're kind of leaving a lot of insights on the table as a result. And I guess, I mean, one of the things I often go back to is in getting people to adopt data products is really trying to find a win that you can point to. So in that situation, can you present alongside that Excel the data visualized in a way that is going to reveal something that was not previously obvious, to kind of get them going like, oh, that was useful. Then, maybe then they have a table and one trend chart. Now you're on the road, right? Now you've made some progress. But just like getting that one opportunity to kind of open their minds to, there's more in this data than maybe you're seeing already. But I'm sure other people have other thoughts on that. Neil?
So Zach, I know that probably a lot of people on this call know about Edward Tufte and his profiling of the Challenger disaster and how it could have been prevented. And that is to me a prime example of just showing rows and columns without any kind of organization to the data. And so not only is it so that would actually be a story you could tell, right? This like, here's this example of how rows and columns doesn't work.
That is a great one. Exactly.
You know, Jason, I was just going to add on to give an example of what Zach said. You know, because I've got a client nonprofit. You know, I work with all nonprofits, so this will sound familiar to some of you guys that are working at, say, like Denver Human Services. And they're like, hey, you know, at the end of the day, we've got like these 30 various metrics that go on our grant reports, and we just need to see where they're at. Like, we need to see where they're at on a monthly basis. And I tried really hard to think, is there a better way other than a table? But really, when we're talking about 30 unique different metrics that are changing on a regular basis, like creating a table is probably the only way to share that information in a way that was concise. And they knew what they were talking about. It was serving them for their job. And so I feel like in some of those situations where I run into that, where the challenge is, I just want the table, like actually the table maybe is really the right tool for their task at hand, but there is a broader opportunity than the task at hand that data visualization can be super useful for. Like, for example, for the same organization, they had, you know, a hunch that, you know, most of their services were going to a relatively small, you know, percentage, just kind of the 80-20 rule, like 80% of our effort is going to 20% of people we're working with. Is that equitable? And we can use data visualization to answer that question. That just wasn't, you know, a question that they had typically had ability to explore, you know, in the past. So I feel like there's this, sometimes it's like trying to open into the broader realm of like, what more things could we do with data? Maybe the table is the right thing for your task at hand, but you could probably see, you know, the bigger opportunity there for them and enlighten them about that. And don't get too worried about the fight on the table. You know, sometimes that's just how people, you know, want to see, especially how folks like me sometimes even just want to see their data.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And you guys are kind of echoing what we do really is, you know, give the customer what they want and kind of show them something else, maybe a very simple visualization that points out things that they didn't see before, right? And, you know, my clients are, the clients I speak of, they're starting to become more comfortable with it. And I completely agree, Paul. Sometimes a table is the right thing to use. You just got to be aware when and why that is.
I'm going to jump in with a question. And Heather, I won't put you on the spot, but you put it in your registration. I thought was a good one. And it was essentially, you know, how can you make sure that non-data people don't misinterpret your data? And Zach, you've touched on this a bit. I think that it sort of relates to how much you talk about context. But do you have anything else you want to emphasize to that question? How to make sure that a sort of non-data person doesn't misinterpret and kind of start going off in left field with something?
Yeah, I think, I guess I feel like this is why we're so committed to this idea of creating this like narrative path. This is kind of how we think about it, where you're guiding your users through the data in a pre-designed way, which doesn't mean you don't give them flexibility to interact with the data and explore the data to some degree, but you're sort of like, if you like to bowl the way I bowl, it's with the bumpers. It's the kid bumper things where it's like, I know I'm going to score. I know I'm going to knock one pin down at least. And that's sort of how I think about it, is that if you can control the flow of how someone is interacting with it, then you can explain the different steps. You can explain what someone should take from each of those steps. We've committed to really kind of straightforward visualization components, I would say. I think this is one of the areas where it can get challenging, is when you make more kind of the more advanced visualizations are going to be more open to, first of all, people not understanding what they mean or what they should interpret, and then misinterpretation from it. So keeping things kind of simple and on a path makes it easier to write that context and to explain what they should be taking from it. And then maybe it's the dialogue part too, is that I don't think, this goes back to the question of how do you get people to engage with it? I think there are a lot of situations where you want to be able to share your data story or your visualization, but also be there for that conversation so that you're not expecting someone to just dive in, understand it, pull the insights, because there will be good analytics creates more questions, right? I mean, there's a little bit of the challenging, frustrating part, I think, of our jobs is that, like, if you do your job well, you're creating a bunch more questions start to come up, and it's good if you're a consultant, but it's not all, it can be challenging. So being there to help answer those questions and clarify what the data means, I think, is important. There's also a thing that we haven't done much with yet, but I think is important is to be really clear the lines between what you're seeing and how that metric got calculated and where that data came from, so that people can pull that thread to say, like, I see this number, but when was the data last updated? What was the data source? How did this metric get calculated? If you can put that context around the actual numbers automatically, I think that helps a lot as well.
Anybody else have a question that's on their mind? Especially somebody who hasn't asked one yet. We've got about 7 minutes, and I saw another question that came in our registration from Anton, and it's a little bit different, but I think it's actually going to be really relevant given who's on this call. So he asked, and essentially my thing is, how do I find a job focused on data viz? After you get a PhD and you don't want to stay in academia, kind of making that transition. So Anton, feel free to jump in if you've got anything else to add to that. But I think that there's actually some other folks on this call who have made transitions like that or are in a good position to comment. And so maybe, Zach, if you have any thoughts, feel free to go first, but then let's open it up, to other folks, especially to some of the other evaluators I'm seeing on this call that have made transitions like that, in the past.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can add too much. I started my own company, which is is one way to make sure you're the last person employed somewhere. Doesn't mean you get to keep your job, but I think that's, yeah. It's probably, I'm sure someone else has a better answer on this topic.
Yeah. So everybody else, feel free to jump in, especially any of y'all that have PhDs or advanced degrees that made that jump.
Well, I'm one of those people with an advanced degree, and I chose not to follow the academic path, partly because in academia, there are lots of tables. You read a journal article, table after table, and even their graphics are pretty awful sometimes. But so it gives you an opportunity when you move into applied realms to kind of spread your wings a little bit and do different things, and like explore the tools that like you've created, Zach, and it's kind of exciting, honestly. And there's really no shortage of applications in the real world for data visualization. None at all.
I would agree with that. When I finished my PhD, I knew I didn't want to go into teaching at all. I am not comfortable in front of people mostly. So I've really focused on research and where I could find research positions. And the positions I've been in have generally had some sort of emphasis on visualization. So while I didn't specifically look for visualization, it's definitely been a big part of my career and something I've had to learn on the way.
You know, Anton, one thing I would share, I don't have a PhD, so can't speak from that perspective, but I know a ton of folks who have made that sort of transition. So I think, first of all, believing it's possible. Second, you know, things that I've seen, so knowing the right networks, like we've got the Data Visualization Society in general. Are you a part of that, or have you seen that, Anton? If not, I'll
Yes, that's where I found this call
okay.
too.
Awesome. Yeah, because I feel like that's the quite a large community. So glad that you're already on that. And then, yeah, I think just basics around, and I might post in our Slack channel too around this, around like basics around portfolio, you know, making sure you've got a good sort of like body of work that is publicly available that you can share. That also shows, because I feel like some of this is not only, you know, like proving that you can do data viz, but actually even showing your sort of viewpoint or stance on, you know, like style and how you're like, especially how you do this. You know, I think it's so visual. So I think having that is a huge asset, which I'm sure you're already, you know, like aware of and working on. But that's the advice when we had a careers sort of event around data viz. A lot of folks mentioned, you know, like show, don't tell, you know, especially in this field, that's super helpful.
Okay, thank you. And but one more question. You mentioned that you work for a nonprofit, but maybe is there a way to, for example, help some nonprofit with making them visualizations and also then use that for this portfolio? So, for example, maybe someone is searching, but they don't have enough financing for hiring this someone. So. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's actually a really that's a great idea in terms of how do you build a portfolio, like doing pro bono projects for nonprofits and creating something that's visual, knowing that there probably isn't many nonprofit organizations don't have even somebody who would be, you know, willing to learn Juicebox. Hopefully they do. It's not a hard tool, but a lot of times folks are just so busy that even having somebody who can create a product like that for them, that's a huge win. And it's something that's easy to put on the portfolio. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. There's so DataKind is a sort of pro bono data science organization. There's another one, Delta Analytics. Those are two, I mean, albeit US-based organizations, but I'm sure that they would welcome, you know, if you want to involve with either one of them, because they source pro bono projects that are in the data realm. So essentially every organization they work with already has some data. And you know, they need somebody to fill that information designer role often. You know, there's other roles, but that's an important role as well. So I would suggest checking out both of those. Those are both opportunities to get into like pro bono projects that are already set up. You know, if you know of a community organization that needs support, go for it. That's great. I think one of the challenges is just knowing, like, is data visualization the right answer to this problem? And you know, their pipeline, DataKind and Delta Analytics, they kind of filtered for that already. So they're great places to start to find those opportunities.
Yes, thank you very much.
Totally. Awesome. All right, y'all. Well, I think we're at our hour. So just wanted to thank you guys for being here and spending this time. And thank you so much, Zach. Just great to hear from your experience, and check out Juicebox. I know I'm gonna have to dive into that tool after this. So
yeah, everyone, please sign up. It's free. And if you want a demo, I'm more than happy to spend half an hour showing you around. So it's Zach at juiceanalytics.com. It's probably on somewhere else, but feel free to ask. So
yeah. And I'll
take a look. Would love your feedback.
Absolutely. And I'll share the link to that out and your contact information in a follow-up email. Also, we'll share a recording for the folks who are unable to join this, but would express some interest in checking it out. So yeah, thanks again, everybody. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. And Yeah, Zach, thanks again. Appreciate it as
Thanks,
always.
Zach.
Great questions. Thanks, guys.
All right, take care, y'all. Bye.